Now that our quilt top is done, let's work on the 3D elements, the flowers and the leaves. For the 3D embellishments, I will be using these colors for the flowers and this light green for the leaves. I'm going to bring the 3D elements into Embrilliance. I could go to Merge Stitch File, but I am going to just open my folder that has all of my files and then open the embroidery file. I will need to do several hoopings to fit all of the designs. The first I'm going to bring in are the leaves, and I will put that in the same hoop as the large pink flower. This is one reason I like to open the folder and drag in the files versus going to the Merge Stitch File. I can bring in as many as I need. When you use the Merge Stitch File icon, you would open your file and bring your design in, and then if you were to want another design, you would have to go back to the Merge Stitch File, find your design, and bring it in as many times that you need for as many files as you want. When I open up the folder, I can drag and drop as many files without having to go back to that folder each time. I'm going to change my hoop size. I will go to the Preferences folder and choose the 6x10 hoop. I will move the flower down, and I will move the leaves up, and I am going to rotate and move these down just a little bit. I do want some space between, and I'm going to show you why I am leaving this top empty. I will be using wash away stabilizer for all of these felt embellishments, and I cut it the same way that I do the muslin, and I will show you that later. This will just save on wash away stabilizer. So this one is ready to go. I'm not going to worry about doing any kind of color sorting. I will just run one design at a time. I will run the leaves and do the complete design, and then the same for the flower. I will file, save stitch file as. I will save it in my combined files folder so that I can take it to my USB. I'm going to open another page. I have the 6x10 because that's what I used last. I will open my folder, and I need to bring in 2 of the yellow flowers. I will put these close together for the same reason and leave this space empty, and I will again show you that when I'm ready to stitch out. I am going to color sort these flowers since it is the exact same design. I will come to Utility, Color Sort. It's been changed by 3 colors or 3 steps, and I will select New View. Now I have one design with 3 steps. I will go to File, Save Stitch File As, and name my design. I will save it in my Combined Files folder so I can take to my USB. I will open another page, go back to my folder, and this time the small blue flowers, I need 3. Two of these are going to be the same color, so I'm going to put those a little bit closer together, although there's really not much difference in the space. And I'm going to color sort these also. Now the first 2 will be again the same light blue felt, and they will have the same color stitching. This third flower is a darker felt and will have a different color of thread. So before I color sort, right now all of the detailed stitching is the same Tidewater. That's fine for flower 1 and flower 2, but for the third I need to change that so my machine will stop, so I will be able to change the color of thread. So I will select it, and I need to change it to a different color than what's already in the design, so I need to choose threads, and I will just pick any color as long as it's not the Tidewater. So now when I color sort, I'll go to Utility and Color Sort, select a new view, it's one design, and you can see that all of the placement lines will run at the same time. All of the tack down will run at the same time, and that doesn't need to be different colors because this tack down line is actually a trimming line and we will not see that thread, so those can be the same color. And then these two flowers will have a different thread color for the detail as the third flower. So that's all set. I will save that as well in my combined files folder. And I will put this on my USB and take to my machine. I want to show you what I do with my regular stabilizer as well as my water soluble stabilizer. This is the water soluble that I will be using for the felt flowers and leaves. And as you can see, I have just taken the whole strip and I have cut it to fit my hoop, but I have left the whole roll together. So it is exactly the same way as I do the muslin. For example, when I made the pink flower and the leaves to fit into the 6x10 frame, I put them together so they will probably take up about 2/3 of this hoop. If I were to have just cut my stabilizer to the hoop size, I would have probably had about 6 inches of unusable stabilizer that I would have just wasted, or I would have had to put into a super small hoop. This way, once I finish the flower and the leaves, I will just move the whole strip down like I have my muslin and continue working on the flowers, and I will maybe have an inch or two between each of the hoopings, and I will save a lot of stabilizer. Probably by the time I'm done with my 3 hoopings, I probably will save enough stabilizer for a whole nother hooping versus just wasting it. So let's get started and finish these flowers. I will select Embroidery and go to my USB and then to the Combined Files folder. I will scroll down to find the leaves and the large pink flower. I will hit Set, and then I will change my hoop size to 6x10. Then I will select Embroidery. I will go to Layout and then Move, and using the down arrow key, I will move the design all the way to the bottom. For the leaves and all of the flowers, I will use the same color bobbin as the thread. For the flowers, the first part of the stitching needs to be a visible color, so I will use the thread that I used in the previous design. This will be a cut line, and then I will change to the matching bobbin and thread. Here you can see I have moved the designs that I just stitched down but have kept them attached to the stabilizer. I will hoop for the next set of flowers. I will repeat the same steps for the following designs. Here are all the felt embellishments taken out of the hoop. I will cut them apart and then show you how I will cut each of the flowers. For the leaves, I will simply cut around about 1/8 of an inch around each of the leaves. For the flowers, I did a contrasting color, and for this pink flower, it's the white. This is the cut line, and the red stitching is the detail of the flowers. So I will take my small curved straight scissors, and I will cut around the white stitching for this pink flower. For these little small blue flowers, they have this yellow stitching. Again, that is the cut line, and I will just cut around all of the yellow stitching. For the yellow flowers, it's this red stitching. If you can see on this though, this gold thread and some of this red thread are very, very close. So I think what I'm going to do on this one, if I were to cut directly on that red line, you can see how close these flowers will be. They might just pull off and rip the petals off. So I am actually going to cut along the top of the petals to make this area thicker, and then I will come in and cut the petals into the round shapes. It will probably be easier when I actually cut them to see what I'm talking about. Is the blue flower cut. Make sure that the centers have this little round piece that will be the base of the flower. So that is not something that you need to cut off. It needs to stay. You can see I still have little bits of the stitching line. I will pull those out, and it still has the water soluble stabilizer on the back. Once I get them all cut, I will soak them in warm water. Let's finish cutting the flowers. I also want to mention that if you can cut slightly to the inside of the stitching line, like I did right here, then that removes the stitching and you don't have to take it off later. However, with, for example, these yellow flowers, I'm so close to that stitching line that I probably won't be able to do that for the spiral part. But if you can, if you cut just to the inside of the stitching line, then that's less that you'll have to take time to get all that stitching out. how close this white stitching is to the red. I am going to go ahead and cut outside of that white and just, of course, pick the white thread out. I don't want to cut that close because I may cut the red stitching, and that, of course, isn't good. So you just have to pay attention when you're cutting. If it's too close to the stitching or the detail line, you definitely will have to do some picking out of that thread. Okay, here's the ones that I'm not going to quite follow the stitching line because, again, look how close that yellow stitch is to the red, and that is just a couple of thread widths, and those petals will probably just rip right off. So I am going to cut the spiral first, but I am going to, instead of cutting on this line right here, I'm actually going to drop it down and cut to the top of the petals below it. It should make sense in a little bit. So you see how I'm cutting at the top of those petals? So I'm not cutting this line, and you can see it makes between this where it's going to be cut and the bottom a little bit thicker so that they won't pull apart. So I'm going to continue and cut to the tops of all these petals around to this inside. Now that I have the spiral cut, I'm going to start at the outside and I'm going to cut around the petals. When I get to where I started cutting on top of the petals, I will just come in and cut like a little, kind of like a little V, and finish those off. So I'm to the area where I cut the tops, and I will just simply keep cutting around and doing the same thing, just cutting those petals. Since the top's already been cut, I just have to cut down into a little V. Here are all the flowers cut out. They still have the stitching that I need to take out. I wanted to go over how I decided on what color to do the stitching or the cutting line. I started with the pink flower and I just did white as my thread. Then I stitched the detail with the red thread. I left the red thread in, and my next flowers were the yellow, so I left the red in since I could see that on the yellow, and that became my stitching and cutting line. Then I did the yellow thread for the detail. I left that thread in and had that for my stitching and cutting lines on the blue flowers. As long as you can see the thread to cut the flowers out, it doesn't matter what color, but this way I didn't have to change to, say, a black thread, which I think the book called for. I just kept the darker one in and it all worked out so that I had less thread that I had to change. Here are the flowers with all of the thread trimmed. I have the extra felt that I'm going to put back in my embellishment packet and just save for something else. I wanted to show on this last flower how easy it was to get rid of the stitching line. Of course, with the parts that we cut, because the thread's cut, it's easy just to pull out the threads and they just come right out. But this line we didn't cut because it was so close to the trimming line, so we can't just pull it out. So the easiest way is to flip it to the back and pull out the bobbin. My bobbin, I'm not sure if you can tell, instead of red I had a green bobbin in, just something because I had an extra green bobbin. And because the bobbin thread is basically flat against the back of the project, if you pull that thread, you can see that it pulls, you can almost pull the whole thing out. Pull as much as you can. Kind of gathers. And I'm just pulling, you'll be able to see here in a second that, and it might break and you might have to do it in several sections, but if you watch, here's the end of the thread. I've just pulled out this whole bobbin thread. So now, instead of trying to use a seam ripper to pick out that seam, since I pulled easily the bobbin thread out, now the top thread, you just have to, it just comes right off. So it was quick and easy. And then just pull off all your little excess threads. Now I have all of the thread off, and I am going to dip these in warm water to get off the wash away stabilizer. So I have a bowl of warm water. I'm just gonna throw them all in, especially with the warm. It just, how easily that comes off. You could pull, I guess, some of the excess off, but to me, it's not worth it. It literally comes off in seconds, almost the second you put it in the water, especially warm water. And you'll just take them out and put them on a towel. I kind of run or pinch the felt to get the excess water out. You don't want to stretch it and get it out of shape. Here are my flowers and leaves that have dried, and I'm ready to roll them into flowers. In the embellishment kit, there are some 3D elements that we need. There is a pink wool ball and a little yellow ball. I will be cutting both of these in half. So I will just take the yellow, and they have a round side, and then if you turn it, it's kind of like a flat oval instead of a complete circle. So it matters which way you cut it in half. If I cut it in half this way, I'm going to have a little oval center to my flower. So I need to make sure to cut it so that I have two halves that are round. And here's my little round centers for the yellow flowers. I will only be using one of the centers of the pink ball. So I will take my embellishment kit. These are all of the extras that I have from my kit. You can see it's a lot because I didn't cut my items to size. I just used them as I needed them. So I am going to put one of these in here, and I just keep a packet that I can use for other projects. I will be using a glue gun, and I will put a little bit of glue on the bottom edge, and I will start wrapping it around the ball so that it's lined up with the edge that I cut. As I continue, I don't need to put glue along the entire bottom. As long as I add a little bit here and there to get it to attach, that's fine. I just need to make sure that I'm keeping it as even to the bottom so that the bottom is flat. And it might be easier to hold it a different way, whatever is easier for you to line up the bottom of this flower. I'm coming to the very end, and you can see how flat the bottom is because I tried to line up as I was rolling the best that I could. You just don't want it to become cone shaped. This last little piece I will add glue, and it is a covering for the bottom of the flower. The smaller flowers will be done the same way in that they will be rolled from the outside to the inside, and this is the base, but they do not have centers. So when I start rolling the very center, I will put a little bit of glue, and I will just fold it. And that little fold becomes the center. And again, when rolling, try to line up the cut edge as even as possible so it's a flat edge and it doesn't become cone shaped. For the yellow flower, it's done the same way as the pink, starting with wrapping the edge, trying to stay as even as possible to the cut edge of this little wool ball. And I wanted to point out that I am definitely glad that I left much more space than the pattern called for. You can see it doesn't affect the flower at all, but it's so much easier. I can't really imagine if this was just a little tiny edge. So I'm going to finish the last flower. I'm not sure if you can see, my little ball kind of dips down right here. The edge of the yellow felt is even, and that's really not going to make a difference when I fluff this flower out. So even if you don't get it perfect, try to line the felt up as even as you can so you have as flat a bottom as you can. So now I'm just going to take my thumb and kind of pull back and kind of fluff these out so you can see the difference. You could leave them like this if you want, but you can see the difference on kind of pulling the petals out versus what they look like when you're done gluing. Everything for the quilt top is finished. I will put these on when the backing and the binding have been completed. If you'd like to add a label to the back of your quilt, click the link above and check out that video.